Okay guys, today we're going to do another virtual field trip. We're at Buffalo Creek Park, and we're going to be talking about water today. We're talking about surface water and how streams work, looking a little bit at stream morphology, and just discussing freshwater in general and how it applies to the waters of the area that we live in. So you can come along with us and we'll see what kind of things we can discover. Hey guys, this is Buffalo Creek. This is a tributary of the Broad River. It actually flows into Lake Lure. There's another lake just downstream from this creek before it flows into Lake Lure called Bald Mountain Lake, and so that's the kind of an impoundment in between. But we're going to look at some different things as far as the stream characteristics here. Now, you see Buffalo Creek is really nice and straight right here, but it also has some natural meanders. If you look downstream, you can see that it makes a couple of turns down there. And we're going to talk about some of those aspects of the stream. But before we do, let's look at the larger area around. We see on both sides here, you'll see these flat land areas, and this is your floodplain. Okay, the floodplain is the storage area for flood water. So when Buffalo Creek gets flooded, the floodplain acts as an energy dissipator. All of water can extend out into the floodplain, and it reduces the destructive power of the stream. If all of the water stayed in the stream bank, because you have these channels here, what it would do, it would constrict the flow and would add pressure, which would increase the velocity of the water and would cause severe damage not only to the stream itself but to land downstream. So this floodplain serves a very important purpose for taking out the energy of floodwaters whenever those types of events occur. Now if you look at the creek itself, you notice it has a left bank and a right bank. Now, when we refer to stream banks, when we're looking downstream, the bank on our right side would be the right bank. If we look to the left, that would be the left bank. And this is always how we refer to stream banks, regardless of whether we're facing upstream or downstream. Okay, if we're facing upstream, the opposite would be true. The right bank would be on the left, and the left bank would be on the right, okay, because we're always referring to it from a downstream reference point, okay? So that's an important thing for you to know. Now, when we look at the stream itself, you'll notice, looking upstream, you'll see this little well, actually, I shouldn't say slow moving, fast moving section, okay, that where the water's really swift. There's some rocks, okay, there's a section right here. Okay, right through here where it's flowing, it flows over some more rocks. This is called a riffle, okay? And riffles usually are found immediately after pools. Now you look downstream, you see this slow moving section of water here. That's a pool, okay? And pools actually are the results of where water is flowing over rocks or debris or something like that. And it causes a current, a backflowing current that scours out the bottom sediments, and it leaves this slow-moving pool. It deepens it, and this is where fish and things like to hang out, in these pools, okay? A riffle is where are usually found at the end of a pool, and this is where those sediments tend to collect. As the current moves, it pushes those sediments downstream so that they collect at a particular point, and it shallows the water. And so this water has to flow then over that collected material, and it creates what we call a riffle. Okay, so that's what this is right here. This is a riffle. Okay, when we look upstream, there's a small pool there, and this whole thing right here you would call a run. Okay, so run is just a section of stream. It's usually fast flowing. Okay, but it can have riffles and pools as part of its collective anatomy. Okay, when we look at the bottom structure, you can be able to see some of these rocks. We have everything from large stones to cobbles, and we'll show you some of those things here in just a few minutes. Okay, here's another one of our spring ephemerals. This is called foam flower. Its scientific name is Tiarella cordifolius. Okay, cordifolius means heart-shaped leaf. So if you look at the leaves, okay, if you envision a heart, they're sort of heart-shaped. Even though this has some lobing on it, in general, it's heart-shaped. So if you look here, okay, this would form a heart. Okay, you see that? Okay, the name Tiarella comes from the flowers, okay, which are supposedly said to resemble a tiara. So it's basically a mini tiara or mini crown. Okay, but Tiarella or foam flower is one of the first things that blooms this time of year. And again, it's a spring ephemeral, so that means that it's blooming before the canopy comes on to the trees. So it's taking advantage of the amount of sunlight that's coming down to the forest floor right now. So it will photosynthesize, it will flower, fruit, and go to seed, all in the course of just a couple of weeks. And then all that energy will be transported to the roots, where it will then spend the rest of the season growing underground. So that's what's really unique about these spring ephemerals. Okay, here's another really interesting species. This is called squaw root. Some people call it bear corn, but like the beach drops that we saw a couple weeks ago, bear corn or squaw root is another parasitic plant. It lacks chlorophyll, so it's unable to make its own food, and so it attaches itself to the roots of oak trees and a few other species, okay, and will grow parasitically, getting its food and nutrients from the roots of those host trees. But because it lacks chlorophyll, it's incapable of photosynthesizing on its own and therefore cannot make its own food. But really neat plant. Later on, this plant, when it goes to seed, it will actually look like corn because of the fruit that will appear, where you see these little beige colored flowers. Okay, there will be fruit there in a few months, and it looks like kernels of corn, and that's one of the reasons why they call it bear corn. It's also been called cancer root, okay, because some people believed that this was actually a cancer that was it had formed on the roots of the trees that this thing was living off of. But this is squaw root. Okay, Buffalo Creek is a stream of good water quality. It's relatively undisturbed as far as the buffer zone. Okay, in the floodplain, you see what we call a buffer zone. Now, a stream buffer is designed just like the floodplain itself to act as an erosion control device along the stream bank. So when you have a good buffer zone, this means that the banks remain pretty well intact, and so you don't get a lot of sediment running off from the area upslope of the stream. So it protects the stream very well. You see all the moss that's growing on these boulders. Okay, it tells you that, number one, the level of the stream stays fairly constant. It doesn't see a lot of flooding here. And this is probably due to the fact that it does have a good buffer zone in here. Okay, so that helps reduce the amount of severe flooding that you can have in a place like this. Now, looking over here, you can see there's an island. Islands form in different ways. Sometimes they form through accumulation of sediment. Other times they occur from basically the rerouting of a stream. So something happened at some point in this stream's history that likely caused a reroute. So it forced the stream to cut a new channel. Now, we don't know if the channel on the other side of this island is the original channel, or if this channel that we're looking at right here is the original channel. It's really kind of a hard thing to tell. But streams are always changing. They never stay the same for very long. There's always something that could happen upstream that could change its morphology, okay? Particularly where you have bends and things like that. And there is a slight turn here. Now, water is always going to, or its energy is always going to be forced to the outside of the stream. So in this case, there's a little turn here. The energy is being forced up under this rock. You see that here on the left bank? The energy in this riffle is being pushed up under this bank. So that means that over on the right side, you see sediment deposits. So you can look over there and you can see some rocks. You can see some sand over on the right bank, which would be on the left side of that island over there. Okay, and that's because that's on the outside of the stream. The energy is moving towards, or excuse me, that was on the inside of the stream. The energy is moving towards the outside of the stream. Where the main current flows in a stream, that's called the thalweg. Okay, Thalweg. Okay, so really interesting stuff. Okay, so this is called an alluvial floodplain. Okay, and it's called alluvial, okay, because it's made up of stream deposits. If we were to dig down in the ground here just a little bit, we'd find the ground is really sandy, okay, and that's because it's full of these alluvial deposits, okay, from the stream. So at times when it has flooded, the sediment that it was carrying got deposited on the bank and created this wide floodplain that you see here. And so we say it's alluvial because of the material that has been deposited here. Okay, alluvium can consist of sand, other types of soil. A lot of times you'll find rocks. If we were to dig a little ways down under this soil, we would see probably some small stones and cobbles and things like that in here. Now, alluvial floodplains usually have certain species that are associated with them. You can find some hemlock in here. There are some hickory. There's ironwood. Okay, there's an ironwood tree right there. The understory, as far as the herb layer in here, is similar to some of the things that you would see in a rich cove forest. Okay, except for one notable exception. This plant here, this is called dog hobble. Okay, and this stuff loves to grow in floodplains, and that's where you most of the time would see it. Okay, there's also some creeping phlox. That's the purple flower that you see here. There's some Christmas fern in here. You see the new fronds that are opening up, and still a few little fiddleheads that haven't opened up yet. Okay, but just a really neat little spot in here. But this whole floodplain is meant to be able to discharge the flood waters when this tends to flood, which is very rarely. This probably only floods this severely about it's about a 1% chance every year, and so that seldom happens, and sometimes it may not even happen at all. I mean, who knows how long it's been since there's been a major flood in this little area here. You see that part of floodplains, one of the things that they do, they have these depressions, and this is where water has flowed at some point, created this little depression in here. Okay, but look how much Lakothui or dog hobble there is in here, so you can see how well it really likes the floodplain. Okay, now we're up off the trail a little ways. Okay, and we've come to this little spot here. Okay, there's two valleys that come together right here. If you look up that way, that's kind of the nose of a long ridge that actually extends back up to the trail higher up on the mountain. But this is like a little miniature cove in here. It's slightly more acidic than a rich cove, so we probably couldn't classify it as rich cove, but there are some similar species because there is some overlap between acidic cove and rich cove species. But the feature I want to point out here is this little stream here. This is what we call a intermittent stream. If you look, it's coming out of the ground right over there, and then it jumps. You have a area of land, okay, and then you go further back up in there, and it'll come out of the ground again. But this is an intermittent stream, and this is really how all streams begin. Okay, as surface water drains down through the soil, it will find little places where once it begins to pick up some speed, it will begin to carve out the ground underneath in a process called piping. Okay, so as that water flows, it creates channels underground, and at some point it will find a place where that pipe has to end, and so it'll blow out the soil at the outlet, and then it'll start to flow across the ground, and then it'll find a weak spot in the soil, and then it'll go back underground and will stay that way for a little while until eventually it gets larger, collects more water along its trip, and finally stays above ground until it meets a larger stream. Okay, but we would call these just intermittent streams. The old timers called them branches, okay, because they were not main streams, okay, but rather just a sub branch off of a main stream. Okay, we just call them tributaries. Okay, but it's an intermittent tributary because of the breakup between actual surface flow and where it goes underground. Okay, but these are neat places. They're good habitat for a lot of different things. Salamanders in particular like these little intermittent streams. They're very similar to what we call mountain seeps, like what you saw at Bat Cave. Okay, so but all this starts out as groundwater, and where it comes out on the surface, that's what we call the groundwater surface water interface. Okay, because all groundwater at some point will, where it's close enough to the surface, will come out and become surface water. So that's important to understand. Okay guys, so this is one of my favorite shrubs of the southern Appalachians. This is called sweet shrub. It's also called sweet bubby, Carolina allspice, the spice bush. Let's see, what other name? Sweet booby, and I'm not going to tell you how it got that name, but it's a great plant. It's one that smells really nice. It has an apple scent similar to that of the little sweet Betsy trillium that we saw previously, and it's likely that it has that smell because it probably attracts a similar pollinator. Based on the color and the smell, that would seem likely. There was a graduate student that was doing some work with this plant a few years ago, and I never did see what her findings were, but her prediction was that they were pollinated by something similar. But the interesting thing about sweet shrub is the seed pods that will come on later in the summer. The seeds are little brown seeds, and as the story goes, these seeds are eaten by mice, or at least packed away by mice. Mice will actually crawl out onto the seed pods and will gnaw a hole in them, and then those seeds will drop down on the ground or be carried away by the mouse, who will then bury it under the ground and to come back and get it later. And then from there, those will sprout as new shrubs. They also grow rhizomatously. So if you look here on the ground, all of these sweet shrubs that you see growing on this bank are connected by an underground rhizome. Okay, so they're all a singular part of a singular plant. So really neat stuff here. But I love to smell these because of that apple smell that they have, and it's really a more pungent smell than what the little sweet Betsy has. The little sweet Betsy smell tends to be a little sweeter, whereas these tend to have more of a sour, fermented smell. But either way, it still smells really good. So earlier when we were talking about sweet shrub, we were talking about the seed pods that form on this plant. This is one from last year. And there's another one back in here behind. I don't know how well you can see that, but it has several on it. Okay, you see that? Okay, but these are the pods that form on sweet shrub. Now, interesting thing about these, and I've never observed this myself. I would love to. I think it would be very cool. But these haven't been gnawed on yet. But mice will come out on these things and gnaw a hole. You can actually hear the seeds rattling around in there. But they will gnaw a hole, and those seeds will fall on the ground, and the mouse will scurry down and he'll pick those up and he'll cache them away somewhere, and then more sweet shrub will come up as a result of those seeds being gnawed on by that mouse. Now, there's a legend that I've heard. I don't know how true this is. I've not done the research on it myself. But supposedly, the mouse, when he eats this, he'll carry that seed away and eat a seed. And the seeds are poisonous. And the mouse, unknowingly, poisons himself and will die. And supposedly that seed will stay in the mouse's stomach until it dies, and because it gets basically scratched, the seed surface gets scratched by the acids in the mouse's stomach, it goes through a process called scarification. And that scarified seed, where that mouse carcass ends up decomposing, that seed remains intact and will come up from that mouse's body. Now, I don't know how true this is. This is merely a legend that I have heard, but certainly an interesting story, to say the least. All right, guys, so I don't claim to be an expert on most anything, and certainly not when it comes to mushrooms. This is what we call a morel. Now, morels are something that are collected by mushroom hunters all over, especially this time of year. This is the time of year when morels appear. Morels are a delicacy. Okay, it's one of the favored mushrooms for mushroom hunters. They'll fix morels with a lot of different dishes, but people flock to areas where morels are found because of the taste. They love these things. I personally have never had them. I like mushrooms, but it's just one of those things that just never has been a big priority for me to go and collect them. But I know people that do, and they swear that it's the best tasting mushroom anywhere. So that's what these are, morels. Look how they look like brains. Okay, so they're kind of bizarre shaped, and that's one of the ways that you can identify them. But you have to be careful, because there are a couple things that look similar to morels that are poisonous, so you have to be very careful. One called a false morel, which gets much larger than the typical morel. Hey guys, this is a shrub called horse sugar. And there's a bunch of this that blooms along the Dittmer Watts Trail out behind Lake Lure Classical Academy. The horse sugar is also called sweet leaf, okay, because the leaves have a sweet taste. Okay, but what's really remarkable about this plant, especially right now because the leaves haven't shown up on it yet, are the numerous stamens that the flowers have. Okay, it doesn't have any petals, so it's what we would call an apetalous plant, okay, because it lacks petals. Okay, but it has lots of these bright orange stamens. Okay, it really makes it stand out. Okay, in the center of the flower you'll find the pistil, okay, which is the female organ of the plant, okay, where the pollen would go into to fertilize the ovary. Okay, but the stamens of the male plants and contain the pollen would be needed to pollinate this plant. But this is horse sugar. It likes these dry ridges, usually where there's a lot of mountain laurel. Mountain laurel is one of the species that's most often associated with it. Up here on this ridge, there's a lot of pine. There's Virginia pine up in here. So really dry ridge. This is what, if you look around, you see all this mountain laurel, okay? This is just a mountain laurel thicket, okay? And this is common along these really steep, dry ridges. So we see this a lot in places like this. Okay, so this is my, or actually one of my absolute favorite spring wildflowers. This is called fire pink. They also called it catch fly. But fire pink is another spring ephemeral. Okay, as far as where it grows in lots of places, but it really likes dry banks and things like that, and usually in open woods. But fire pink is called catch fly because it has these sticky hairs on it, and you can actually, I don't know if you can see those in this or not, but those sticky hairs actually supposedly used to catch whatever the pollinator would be. Okay, the middle parts of the flower there, where the stamens and pistil is, that's where the pollen would be, and so the pollinator would come in there, and because it's sticky, that would all stick to whatever that pollinator would be. And I'm assuming, because of the name, that maybe flies would be a pollinator for this, but I've also seen bees pollinating this plant as well. But fire pink is absolutely wonderful. There's not a lot of things that have that brilliant red color in the forest, so pretty cool. Hummingbirds also like this plant because of that deep red color, and it has nectar down at the bottom of the flower. All right, so this place is chock full of all these little ravines and water coming down them. Most of the water that you see in a lot of these ravines is basically surface water, okay, that gets absorbed by the soil, and then when it reaches bedrock, it comes out of the ground. So depending on how much rain has fallen over the course of the year will determine how much flow there is in these little ravines. Okay, this is a pretty strong flow here right now, okay, basically because we've had quite a bit of rain over the winter months. Now earlier when we were talking about rocks and things like that in the stream, these larger rocks, these are what we would call stones, okay. Then the smaller rock that you see here, okay, this is what we call cobble, okay, and cobble are the small broken up weathered pieces of rock that have been moved downstream, and as water flows over them, it erodes and weathers that rock so that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Cobble is very important, particularly in large stream beds, because it provides habitat and places for fish to lay their eggs. A lot of times they'll lay their eggs in the cobble. There's one species of fish called a bluehead chub, and it actually will take these little rocks here and it will put them in its mouth and carry them around and build a little rock mound, and in that mound is where the female will lay her eggs. So cobble is very important as far as stream substrate and what it provides. Now under these larger stones, these would be good habitat for different aquatic invertebrates, okay, like stonefly larvae and dragonfly nymphs and mayfly larvae, and all these are important macroinvertebrates found in aquatic systems, and they spend most of their life cycle in a larval or nymph form, okay, and whenever they're ready to breed, then they'll come out of the water, they'll grow wings, they'll mate, and then die a very short time later. So most of their life cycle is spent in the water, hiding under a rock, grabbing something that comes along for a snack. So very cool. Okay, so here's another one of our little spring ephemerals. Also another one of my favorites. Of course, I really like them all, so it's kind of hard to name a specific favorite. But this is called dwarf crested iris. Okay, it's one of two native irises that grow in this area. The other one is dwarf spring iris, and it tends to grow in drier soils, usually closer to pine and mountain laurel, things like that. But this is a dwarf crested iris, and it likes to grow in more rich soils. So a lot of times you'll find it in kind of covey areas. It likes these rocky places, so sometimes you'll see it growing up on top of rock shelves, like where these are. But it doesn't tolerate a lot of sun and open woods like the dwarf spring iris does. Dwarf spring iris tends to favor more acidic soils, whereas dwarf crested iris tends to favor more alkaline soils. But generally, you're going to find this one where the canopy is more enclosed because it prefers the shade more than the other species. But it's called dwarf crested iris because if you look close at the petals, it has these little interesting humps on it that gives it a crest-like appearance. Okay, and that's why they call it dwarf crested iris. Some people think these are orchids, but they're not. In fact, you can find cultivated irises in greenhouses and places like that, and people plant these in their flower gardens all the time, but not necessarily this species. This species is a little bit more hard to find, and it's very particular as far as where it will grow. If you look over here on the rock, you see this one's actually trying to climb the rock. You see the rhizome there and the shoot of the leaves that are coming up from that. But you see where that's rooted, trying to grow in this thin soil up on top of this rock. Very interesting. Okay guys, so this is Lake Lure, and most of you are probably familiar with Lake Lure. Lake Lure is actually the Broad River impounded, and when I say that, it means that a dam was built in order to create the lake. So that makes Lake Lure a type of reservoir. An impoundment is any body of water, such as a lake, that has a dam that's holding the water in place. If that dam wasn't there, the river would flow through this little valley here, and just like it would anywhere else. Okay, but the dam creates an impoundment. Okay, Lake Lure is basically built for the recreation of the people that live here. It's not a water supply reservoir or anything like that, although for all intents and purposes it serves the purpose of a reservoir because it is holding water. Lakes generally come in two forms. You either have man-made lakes or you have natural lakes. North Carolina has very few natural lakes, and most of those are found down on the eastern part of the state, where you have what are called Carolina Bay lakes. Lake Waccamaw is a large natural lake that's found down the eastern part of the state. In fact, the largest natural lake in North Carolina is called Lake Matamuskeet, which is located down near the Outer Banks. Lake Lure's water quality is good, and I know that because I used to do all the water sampling here on the lake, so I know pretty much what the numbers look like. But it's a great lake for swimming, for fishing, and contrary to what many people would have people to believe, Lake Lure is not nasty. It has had a nickname Lake Sewer for a long time, and perhaps one day we'll talk about that in more detail. Not today, at least not in this particular trip. But Lake Sewer is not an appropriate name for this lake because the water quality is actually very good. So this is Lake Lure, and an example of a man-made lake.